in the matter of 6 months, I'm dragging a desktop computer into ad agencies in New York to get them convinced about 3D. And within 6 months, I'm on like a tiny Sony laptop, right? So the technology growth was happening so fast that you could play off of that. The broadband growth was happening. So you had these fundamental components which pre-exist for you today that are actually coming online. And I think the management lessons that came with that was, you had to be able to dream as fast as the innovation was coming at you. And you had to have business models that would fit into the next version of that, not just the one so if you thought service company and you thought, whatever, first internet job hunting or something, you were behind the day you dreamed about.
Joe, thank you so much for making the time. I'm delighted to have you on. And when I was doing my research, I was like, you can't get more of a serial entrepreneur than you in your experience. So I know this is going to be a fun one.
It's a high compliment given the guests that you've had on, but for the most part, maybe we better just wait and see how it goes before we start throwing those out.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. No. I know because done the research and everyone I've spoken to has spoken very highly of you. So, and I want to strip it back because when I talk about the serial entrepreneur comment, you built before Bunq. We'll come on to that. You've built 5 companies or been involved in like the very early founding teams of 5 companies, 2 of which have gone on to exit. Just walk us through, if you can, what have been the biggest lessons across those 5 companies, regardless of like sector or industry, technology. What were the things that kind of really founded your love for entrepreneurialism and your skill set as an operator?
Yeah, so let's start all the way back, and I think it's the most important company. Again, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure, by the way. Don't let me forget to say these things. All the way back, look, you talk about a love of entrepreneurism. Like so many people I know that get into building their own companies, it starts with some kind of cold necessity, right? So my story starts back in, Jackson, Tennessee in the US with a very, let's say, modest income family. We didn't have much. And I'm the first kid in the family ever gets a chance to go to university. So, I mean, out of a history of a family, I'm the first one that is going to go, and nobody can afford it. So what do? So I started a company to make cash so that I could pay for university. So it wasn't like I set out with this great vision of entrepreneurism. I set out like on how the fuck am I going to pay for, university. So that's where the first one comes from. That company was called Fix It, and it was a home repair and improvement company because I grew up working with my hands. So, and it also came with a large bunch of naivete, which was I saved for like 2 years and thought I had it all in the bank, and I really only had about a semester worth of money. So I was just kind of a dumb kid. But the good news was, and this is why it's the most important company, the good news was that I found out I was good at drumming up opportunities. Like I was pretty good at finding the jobs, but I was better at finding the jobs than I was at actually, probably the home repair work itself. Like I was pretty good, but I wasn't like master craftsman. So I moved the business into sourcing and then ultimately would sell it when I graduated university. Most important part of that whole business was it broke my brain. It made me see that I wasn't just a kid who was going to go work in a factory and that I actually could, that this was a possibility. See my hand here because I keep thinking visualization of the ceiling, right? So I think that was the most, probably to this day, the most important company I ever ran because it made me believe, oh, that shit's possible. So what else is possible? Keep going. Just keep going.
Yeah. And after that first one, how quickly did you launch your second company? Were you like, okay, cool, I'm ready to go straight away?
Yeah, so the first one was like sell it for 300,000. Sounds like a gigantic success. My business acumen was I probably owed 290,000 or something like that at the time. And like $5,000 of that was me and a bunch of friends going to Florida at the end. So then so I don't have a lot to live off of. And so pretty quick. And so it was right away. We just had to do something else. And then with some other people, we started up a service company. So it was one of those where you move from one to the other because you've sort of found this freedom and you you build this belief, right? Like,
Yeah.
maybe it's possible. So one right after the other, frankly.
Yeah, and it's an interesting period as well. I find for these five companies, right? Because correct me if I'm wrong, it was roughly what, like 1990 all the way through to 2004. What were
Yeah.
the biggest changes during that window that you saw when it comes to just building companies? Forget what
Yeah.
company, whatever it was. Like, yeah,
So you're in a world, you're in a time when, I mean, technology is running at light speed. It's running at light speed now, right? It's always
yeah,
running at light speed, but you're in like the early days of the internet, the early days of mobile phone, all these things. So
yeah,
physical devices are coming online. I remember in like the third or fourth startup, we're running a 3D company, and like in the matter of 6 months, I'm dragging a desktop computer into ad agencies in New York to get them convinced about 3D. And within 6 months, I'm on like a tiny Sony laptop, right? So
yeah,
the technology growth was happening so fast that you could play off of that. The broadband growth was happening. So you had these fundamental components, which pre-exist for you today, that are
yeah,
actually coming online. And I think the management lessons that came with that was, you had to be able to dream as fast as the innovation was coming at
mm,
you.
mm,
And you had to have business models that would fit into the next version of that, not just the one that you. So if you thought service company and you thought, whatever, first internet job hunting or something, you were
yeah.
behind the day you dreamed it up.
Yeah, it's super interesting. During that period as well, last question on this piece, just 'cause I'm fascinated by it. What were the principles of being a founder or being a member of an early team and a founding team? What were the principles that you noticed? You thought, okay, these are like absolute non-negotiables when I launch a company. And I know you've invested in companies as well, so I'm sure you look at those principles within the founders that you back as well. Like, yeah, what were those, and how did the experiences early on? How did they shape that?
You're you're awfully good at giving credit to early versions of people to think that they were dreaming in some structured way. That we were all so smart that we organized our shit so well. But there are a few things. If I can answer the question accurately, there are a few things where you learn through mistakes. Like you always learn through mistakes.
Yeah,
Every great entrepreneur I know is not sitting on top of this giant chessboard of magnificent intelligence as much as they're like, I screwed that up so many times. I don't do that anymore. Like that
yeah,
hurts. And I think that, hiring, guess what? Like crappy people create crappy business. And
yeah,
genius people create genius business. So number one became, I never thought that I was the smartest person in the room, but I always felt like I might be able to outwork everybody. I mean, I grew
yeah,
up in this way, this blue collar way where like, dawn to dusk, you were working.
yeah,
So I put the hours to work. And I think the principle one was to just hire anybody that was so much smarter than me if I could get them.
mm, mm,
So that's kind of thing number one. Thing number two was, sell ahead. Like we were always selling ahead of
yeah,
our capability because we would catch up. And from a technical perspective, we could code into the problem rather than
yeah,
wait for it. So we would sell ahead. And in third, it was like we had to go and build magnificently useful partnerships. And by that, I don't mean,
yeah,
like the fundamental outsourcing company for coding. Most of my companies, we always did our own tech. I meant
mm,
like go after the biggest partner possible with the realistic expectation they won't do shit for you, but you
yeah.
will have aligned with them and you'll have a pathway in. And that sounds a bit ambiguous, but if you've done an early stage company, you'll probably know exactly what I mean.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I think that's such sound advice. And okay, so we roll around to 2004. It was, I think. You then decide to join Microsoft. Totally different beast from running a startup, right? I'd love to know, one, what kind of drove that decision, and two, tell us about the first like 30 days at Microsoft. You go from running a startup to boom.
I will. I'll trace back a bit because I think one of the things we didn't talk about is that of course, this is five companies. The early days are
Mm,
five different companies. This is all in the U.S. A couple of those companies made it into both Singapore as well as Europe, so we
okay.
had some expansion. And two of the companies we had exits on. So understanding an exit is an interesting
Ooh,
bit, which we probably don't have time today. But understanding what it means to have a successful exit versus just closing the doors. So those things inform a decision to join a company like Microsoft. So my entire career had been um, you know, smaller companies. I think our largest employee base to date before I met Microsoft was like 120. That was one
Yeah.
of our exits. And this is an exit where everybody makes some money back, everybody gets a 10x return.
Yeah.
My family and I are able to sort of plan on kids in college. You feel great about these things, and
Yeah.
then you instantly want to reinvest it in another company. Um, so Microsoft knocks on the door. One of the things we had done in 3D company, they wanted to do themselves. So they were planning a product that was almost identical.
Okay.
And so they started a process with us to sort of consider buying the company. So I met
Yeah.
Microsoft because they wanted to buy one
That's
of the
cool.
startup companies. And that went through a long process of due diligence where at the end of it, they offered us a lease. They wanted to rent the company, which is basically a move when a big company wants to get at the talent of a company but doesn't really want to buy the IP, which we didn't
Yeah.
know at the time. And it makes them sound quite predatory, but it wasn't so uncommon. Like Google will do it, Amazon will do it, everybody will do that.
Yeah.
So in the end, we said no because we built a product company. But Microsoft comes knocking not so much long later. I left that company. I left the 3D company and had a relatively good, healthy sabbatical because I'd done startups for now 18 years, 15 years before that happened. And so the decision to
Yeah.
join Microsoft was like reconnaissance, like in my head.
Okay.
I was thinking like, oh, big company stuff and understand and go see how they do that stuff and then bam, straight out to startup companies again and take all that information and do. The problem was that they offered me really interesting things to do. And I am,
Yeah.
if nothing, a sucker for an intellectual problem. Like
Okay.
if you want to get to my heartstrings, give me some screwed up, crazy problem. And the first thing that they
Yeah.
offered me was to engage the student population on behalf of the company. And basically they said, like, here's a little bit of a budget and a couple people and good luck, that sort of
Yeah.
thing. So I had this remarkable amount of freedom. So the decision to join was difficult and it was framed in this kind of reconnaissance mindset, but it was never actually the way it turned out. Like it wasn't what I expected at all. And the first 30 days
Yeah.
is a good way to think about it. I think I was in a massive, imposter syndrome for a while. Like
Yeah.
I had no idea how to work in a big company. They use all sorts of language I'd never heard. I think it was like 2 years before I actually admitted I didn't know what enterprise sales meant. Stuff like that. It was really interesting, and I would just spend money unconnected to like a budget. Like and I remember getting this review from a manager, and they're like, "You spent $1 million on this thing. You don't have that budget." And I was like, "It's a big company. We got a lot of money. Like, what's the problem?" So I nearly got fired because I just didn't know how to operate in a big company. I was pretty inept for a while. So those first 30 days were easy because they give you all the cushion. The first 6 months, 8 months, year
Yeah.
were like nearly ready to quit, frankly.
Yeah. Hard adjust. Okay. That's interesting. What would often I think these big companies are given the bad reputation that, okay, they're big, they're slow, they can't move.
Yeah.
Innovation is going to take a long time. Was that your experience? And then second to that question is, coming in with just pure like entrepreneurialism and this drive and the ability to look and find new opportunities and new problems is did you find it slow, or were you like, actually no, I can bring my skill set, bring my energy, and it's applicable in this environment?
I think it depends a lot on where you land in one of those companies. Like, so if you land in
Mm.
the field, so if you were to land in the field where they do all this, you're going to feel, like it's a enterprise sales machine. Like any of these companies, Google, Amazon, anybody, Oracle, somebody like that. I mean, they're either going to
Yeah.
be an enterprise, and you're a monthly numbers, quarterly numbers person, and that's how it's going to go. Your innovation is going to be on the implementation of a strategy already decided. That's what
Yeah.
you're going to be. That's a field job. In the headquarters where I landed, there's you're sort of looking at an annual cycle or maybe a 3 year cycle, and you can do a bit more.
Hmm.
Um, so in the beginning, I felt like it was crazy slow, and I felt like it was overly cumbersome with process. I began to understand systems, and I began to understand scale. So you go to the first meeting in a company like that, and nobody wants to talk about anything that's less than $1 billion of value. Like it's not even on the agenda unless it can generate $1 billion of value. And you start to adjust your thinking. you start to adjust your scale meter, right? You start to think of
Yeah.
tens of millions, hundreds of millions of customers, and everything has to move. So that I think the great value of working in those environments is you begin to understand systems and you begin to understand scale and you begin to
Yeah.
understand durability and longevity for these types of businesses. And when they want to innovate, they have the money to basically just blow it out on one thing if they really want to. Think of a Microsoft like on Azure, right? Ultimately, it became the fundamental value point for the company's increase in valuation, a la Satya Nadella, and then now AI. So they can do that when it's right. Whereas small companies, you kind of already put everything on one thing already. So to move from the startup world into a big company like that, it was a bit of a shock, and also moving a family across the U.S. and everything. But I think the key was I entered into the company at a time when they needed people like me, and they needed
Yeah.
entrepreneurs. They needed people that this was a company that sort of done whatever phase it was in life, and they needed people that thought different. And so I think I survived and I thrived inside of there because I came out of the weird background that I had. And I was
Yeah.
this strange animal, right? I was an English major at university who then started companies that became pretty technical, but then
Yeah.
learned how to raise money and run things, and then general manage and all that. So it was all this. They were used to hiring like MIT and Yale, and I was a weird duck for them. And they didn't quite know what to do with me, but ultimately we found ways to make it work. And I would run not only sort of this kind of thing for students, but I'd go on to run some multi-billion-dollar divisions for them as well. So
Yeah.
I've had groups of up to 1,400 people, and I've done that in like multiple countries around the world. So it was look, I think there's something amazing. Everybody should spend their time in large companies, and everybody should spend their time in smaller companies. From the days of building out a company on my own, I learned hustle. Like just fucking go out and do it. Stop asking questions. Action carries with it its own authority. Like action will carry the power forward if you just get the momentum going. And in a big company, you learn how to like be a little more patient, but also the principle stays the same. You have to take action. You have to do something, or frankly,
Yeah.
everybody sits still. So all those principles carried through.
Yeah.
So 5 companies, 2 exits, 10 years at Microsoft, and then, hey, let's get back into the startup world.
So, Joe, tell us a little bit more about how the opportunity to join Bunq came about and what it was about the company that you thought, hey, this is a really compelling opportunity. I want to go for this.
Yeah. So again, you've got this sort of track record behind of like starting my own companies and then going into Microsoft and then going back into as an investor, a nonprofit, and then like I always speak in terms of we. I've never been able to speak in terms of I always find that like I've never done anything alone. So when I say we, it's family and friends and workmates and
Yeah.
whatever. So we looked at this. I looked at this and said, well, do I want to basically ever join a company again? And
Yeah.
if I did, it would have to be something extremely special, like really
Yeah.
different, because I didn't have to. And I met Ali, the founder of Bunq, on a stage talking to startup companies. So I'm helping this nonprofit. We're talking to young companies and trying to give good advice. My angle is always like, I'm just going to tell you the truth. I'm going to leave all the bullshit right out there. All the whole sell you on why you should be an entrepreneur and how cool and sexy it is. I'm not that guy. I'm the
Yeah.
like, here's what hurts, what's the problem, but if you can do it, why wonderful it is.
Yeah.
And I meet Ali on stage, and we're kind of saying the same things. Interesting, like don't confuse effort for accomplishment, and we're both doing the like cold version of the cold wake up version of being an entrepreneur. And that just kind of set us on the path to get to know each other, and that
Yeah.
led to a few lunches. That led to getting to know, becoming friends. Sort of business friends and then friends. And
Yeah.
that led to him inviting me onto the board of directors or the supervisory board in the Netherlands.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a weird path, right? Because most people don't go from the board into a company. They maybe
Yeah.
might go the other way. So I'm on the board for a few years, and Bunq has hit this kind of international expansion explosion. And Ali sort of says, hey, would you consider, coming in? And like, because you've got
Yeah.
I'm specifically, that's kind of my wheelhouse right there.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know. So why Bunq? First off, I got involved because of the person. That's kind of how a lot of these things start when you're
Yeah.
operating in these kind of circles. But the
Yeah.
second is like who it is and who it wants to be. Don't get
Yeah.
confused. Like Bunq is a tech company that operates as a bank. And people get
Hmm.
confused because it says bank all the time, but this is a deep, deep tech company. I mean,
Yeah.
AI, Bunq was doing AI long before the LLMs became popular. Like they were
Yeah.
automating everything. And why they did it was the most interesting bit. So Bunq has a very difficult recruiting process. Difficult meaning it's hard to get into that company. This is like getting
Mm.
accepted to Harvard or MIT or something. And it's like multiple steps, and you get complaints about it all the
Yeah.
time, but it filters out for their very, very best.
Yeah.
So because of that investment, they wanted to lift the people they had already hired versus just do that startup thing where you continuously cycle bodies in and out. So they wanted to
Yeah.
maintain this group. So that means automation. So that led to the earliest years of AI and automating
Mm.
everything they possibly can, and then lifting this kind of core group. To this day, they have 700 people in the company, but they're doing the equivalent of what Revolut was doing when it had like 2,500 people. So you
Yeah.
just understand like the people focus. So there's this core principle of the company about the humans, and then there's a
Mm.
core principle about the company about technology. So for me, those two things are pretty spot on, stuff I want to be involved with. That got me on the board. What got
Yeah.
me in the company was operations. So there are very few companies that actually have what I would call an operating system. Very few.
Mm.
Most of them are like, how do we do, OKRs? What are the KPIs? What is our rhythm? Do a beer on Friday and all that kind of stuff, right? They follow these sort of things that everybody does. That's not Bunq. Bunq is a asynchronous machine, which means that most everything runs through documents, is documented, and has conversations. You read everything before you get into a meeting. If we
Yeah.
have a meeting with more than 5 people in it, it's kind of weird because nobody like this idea of 10 people in a room doing strategy is just stupid for us. We're just
Yeah.
like that's a silly waste of time. That's just people that don't know what to do. Like if you take the data, the information, put the right person in charge and go, a small group of people can make critical decisions. And that small group of people is not these boss people, it's the owners. So
Yeah.
that's kind of one thing is that there's an operating system. And the core of that operating system is a thing called ownerships. And the
Mm.
company is sort of operates around this thing where everybody has an ownership. So I could show
Okay.
you a picture if I were allowed to that would show you the kind of operating system of the company and the
Yeah.
ownerships, which is sort of like a wheel. And each of the major things the company has to accomplish is divided. And each of
Yeah.
those are divided into ownerships. So, in a simple example, let's say you and I are in marketing, social media, advertising, whatever. Those are
Yeah.
ownerships and they belong to humans and they have numbers on them. And I can always find who owns something in the company. And you have to write your ownership and define it in the
Yeah.
terms of how it serves our core customer. So if you
Wow.
walk with me down this path, and I'll make it simple, obsessive focus on a single core customer, track that back to a set of organized ownerships that have a delivery mechanism, put
Mm.
that into a structure that walks up to a greater goal, and then turn that into a rhythm that works every week and doesn't even need quarterly reviews. Then you have an
Yeah.
operating system. And I
Yeah.
find that the reason I wanted to work inside the company, just as an
Yeah.
FYI, because I am a lover of company operating systems because I think
Yeah.
that is where the majority of every young company fails.
Yeah.
Absolutely eats it is when it comes to running the day to day, not the big ideas and the big news and all that. Those are just moments, few moments in time. The day to day is what makes or kills a company.
Have you found that there's an inflection point when that operating system becomes, whether it's a certain amount of revenue or a certain number of employees or activities that are going on? Is there an inflection point where the operating system not only becomes incredibly important, but is also kind of obvious? Like it starts to, the
Mm.
need for that becomes really like overwhelmingly obvious.
Yes, day one. That's the inflection point. See, the thing is, I know that people will say, "Oh no, we get a few people in a room, we get an idea, we start to build an app." I get you.
Yeah.
But if your dream is to build a big company,
Yeah.
you will, you will build it. There's a metaphor, like someone told me once, like if I want to build a house, I'll build a house, and I'll build the foundation, I'll build the plumbing, I'll set it up, and it'll be maybe 1 story, 2 stories, who knows? I'll build a house, and that would
Yeah.
be a great house. Then one day it'd say, "Oh no, I don't want to have a house. I want to have a skyscraper." Guess what I'm going to have to do? I'm going to bulldoze the house and actually see if I have enough land. But if I
Yeah.
start out day one knowing I want to build a skyscraper, I'm going to architect from the beginning the
Hmm.
things that will actually scale. And inexperience will prevent that, I know. But if
Yeah.
you understand from somebody somewhere that you're building a skyscraper, you will make better decisions from the beginning. And I think
Yeah.
this is the benefit. A Bunq had a benefit of Ali's experience of two other unicorns. So when he started with 5 people, he started in a skyscraper. If you
Yeah.
just if the metaphor holds.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it makes sense. It makes sense. Do you think that this operating system, yeah, being a bank, I know we're talking tech company operating
Yeah,
as a
yeah,
bank,
yeah.
you're operating in a regulated space. Often speed and innovation can be completely compromised because of those regulations. Do you think that the operating system that you had allowed you to navigate that regulatory environment far better and far easier than if you hadn't had it in place?
Yes, is the simple answer. Yes, because there's a structure to how the
Mm.
company works, and there's a clarity to what
Yeah.
it's going after. Now, that also enables magical pace and innovation. So
Yeah.
the catch 22 is the razor's edge of
Yeah.
always being able to technically innovate and then, you know, manage the regulatory environments that you operate in.
Yeah.
There's a lot of technical innovation. So the other reason I wanted to be a part of this is because of that obsession with the demographic, the customer, the obsession with the
Yeah.
user. I use customer for the benefit of your listeners, but frankly, we would only call them users, right? So
Hmm.
that obsession with the user means everything is defined
Mm.
from in Bunq, everything is defined from if it will benefit the user, if the user is asking for it. So there is militant, militant, strict, marriage to what will be better for the people who use our product to the point where we
Yeah.
will forego profit in order to make a user happy because
Yeah.
that is what ultimately the long game is. And I mean that to an extreme. Like if you and I are sitting in the cafeteria and I don't know, we're watching people pick up their lunch in the headquarters in Amsterdam, and you said to me, hey, if you guys move the chairs, it would be so much faster. I would say that's a great idea. You and I are going to do a proposal. We're going to anchor it in data, and we're going to propose back why that would be better
Yeah.
for our user, right?
Yeah.
And if we can't prove it, we're not going to change it because that's not well placed energy.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes total sense. And how, as Bunq obviously started to grow, I mean, there were, significant amounts of capital was raised, and you expect that from obviously a high growth company, but also an experienced founding team, right, that are leading it. As you raise that capital and you start operating in different geographies, how do you, one, keep this operating system alive? And two, how do you then build a product that for across different countries resonates with users in a different way? Or do you just say, okay, no, it needs to be standard. This is Bunq wherever it is in the world. We don't care about which geography we're operating in.
Yeah, I think in general, you're leading the witness because we both know the
Mm.
second half of your statements can't be true, right?
Yeah.
It's that's like the formula for all failure.
Yeah.
So basically, you have to understand what is the core center of who and what you are
Mm.
as a product and as a company, and then starting with the product, the mechanism of user focus, the mechanism of user, centric design, user centric, actually allows you the ability to understand an audience much quicker. So let's say you're going to
Mm.
go expand into Germany. Well, your reconnaissance for Germany is what do German users want,
Yeah.
right? And then you do a lot of tests and measurements prior to launch. So we don't just
Yeah.
take Bunq and copy paste it into France. Like you had to go in and understand what would succeed and how you
Yeah.
could keep it to the core of what Bunq is, and then add. And then mostly those things become like local technical things. Like, as an
Yeah.
example, like how do you verify identity in one country versus another? How do
Mm.
you, kind of comply with the regulatory requirements of reporting and stuff in that country versus another? But we have
Yeah.
found that the kind of look and feel and usability of the app is relatively universal. Meaning it's a funny thing. Like it's the Bunq rainbow and logo and stuff like that has its fan base, and it has a few
Yeah.
that are just like, man, why does it look so different than all the other banks? And of
Mm.
course, all that's on purpose, but it tends to
Yeah.
resonate. People like to see something that has its own personality.
Yeah. And how did you find, from an, I'm intrigued from an operations perspective, hiring as you enter those different geographies as well? Because you've got local customers or
Yeah,
local users. You've also then got local teams, but we've got one operating system and one kind of identity,
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
or do you say, okay, no, we're gonna differentiate this and split it out?
So you have different places that you expand to for different reasons. So there
Mm,
are what you're thinking of as the commercial markets, like where are we going to go do business?
yeah,
There's also what I'd call the operational markets. Like we have large teams in Bulgaria and in Istanbul, Sofia and
mm,
Istanbul. They have to do with our support, onboarding, reporting, and things like that, right? So they have a different purpose than just commercial in the market.
yeah,
So there you're able to sort of design and build really similar cultures and teams that you have to the headquarters because it's a direct extension. As you go into the commercial market component, say Germany, France, Spain, Ireland, US, when the time comes,
yeah,
you have to consider the user again. So you're hiring based on the knowledge of the user. You're hiring based on regulatory requirements, and you're
yeah,
trying to keep it as close as you can to the home culture, but it's
yeah,
then going to be the version of that culture that works in that country. And so you have to be smart enough to be flexible to allow your culture to evolve for the local country, but also smart enough to hold your core principles and your core ideals so that there is a culture that kind of goes across. I mean, I worked in
yeah,
Microsoft, and I can tell you that there were 130 countries at the time, and there's probably 130 different slight variations on the core culture. In fact,
yeah,
working in the field is very different than working in the headquarters. But in a sense, it was still stood for the same things, right? It was
yeah,
like innovation, technology, focused on people, serving governments, consumer. It still stood for the same things.
yeah. What's we've spoken a bit here about expanding into new geographies, and I'm intrigued from your experience and also the kind of companies and other geographies, the kind of wide variety of geographies you've operated in. What's the kind of number one or like top three mistakes that founders make when they do decide to expand into a new geography?
Yeah, pretty standard question too. So one, underestimating the cost. So like taking, I use the U.S. as an example. Like I have European founders who say, we want to go to the U.S. and maybe they're an
Yeah,
enterprise model and they think they'll land a salesperson and they'll go do sales, but they
yeah,
just don't understand the size and the scope. They don't understand how noisy it is, right? So you're so unique in your German company and you want to take it to the US and suddenly you realize there were 40 other companies already doing that and they had triple the budgets because US
yeah,
VCs give out a lot more money. So they underestimate the size and the scope and the cost. So that's kind of mistake number one is underestimating what it's going to take and how long it's going to take. There is a
yeah.
financial payments company out of the Netherlands, which I won't mention the name, that took 6 years to establish itself in any form in the US. And they can tell that
Wow.
story. And it's not us, it's another company. And they didn't have to go do regulatory stuff. So it was
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah,
That's one. Number two is hiring. And you can kind of guess, right? You're a Dutch company and you go to hire Americans and you actually don't translate the cultural differences. Like one of the reasons that I will be on most of the hiring calls for at least the senior people in the US is I'm kind of the US translator, right? So Americans are taught at a very young age to sort of oversell themselves, right? Culturally, we tend to oversell. I can do that. It's a big dream. We can make it huge. We do that. Europeans aren't necessarily taught that way. They're sort of like the value is in the truth and the straightness. And I don't know if one's better than the other, honestly, because I
mm,
find one less ambitious, while the other might be overselling. So there's some place in the middle that's probably right. But
yeah,
I will help translate these
yeah,
personality types that we're hiring and that so you need to understand that and it's not easy enough to just get American. You also have to have someone holding the other side of the principles, right? So hiring is a big one,
yeah,
and most founders will go through 2 or 3 sets of people before they
yeah,
finally land on the ones that work. It's often the best advice to have it, if you have a founding team, one of them needs to move for some period of time to the new country because they
yeah,
can establish and bring the principles with them. That's kind of number two. And then three is probably the way that you structure your offers. And again, I would say, like, culturally speaking, you go into Germany for the first time and you realize it's far more cash-based society than you thought. Like in the Netherlands, we don't really need a place for you to deposit your paycheck from cash. But in Germany, there's a lot more cash. And so you have to make an allowance somehow and have a place that people can deposit cash if you're a bank. So there's all
Yeah.
these components that, just as sophisticated a country, just as modern, and yet there's a set of things. And if I took you to Brazil, we would
Yeah.
be 20 things that were that much different. So I think
Yeah.
these three things are the kind of the size and scope it takes to succeed,
Yeah.
underestimated. Two, how to hire locally is one of the biggest mistakes that are made. You go to a few teams, and then finally is the kind of nuances,
Yeah.
the deconstructing the problem of the local market. Those
Yeah.
are three reconnaissance missions I would launch before I ever launched a new country.
Yeah. And kind of, I guess, sticking on this theme of like expansion and innovation, you spoke about Bunq being a tech company disguised as a bank. When you're testing new technology out and you're trying to roll out new features, do you have a process that you would like, that you typically follow, especially when, it's in a regulated space and you're touching people's money, and this is something that, is often quite sensitive?
There's a lot of places that you can advance and you can innovate quite easily in
Mm,
regulated spaces, and I can stretch that into telecom and in insurance and a few others, right? Because there's a lot of kind of fundamental day-to-day operational things on how you deliver, offer, speak, or communicate, or things like that. So
yeah.
you have probably more space to innovate than you think, based on the way you're asking the question. Um, but then there are others that touch on the fundamental laws and regulatory. Let's take like in banking, money laundering, right?
Yeah.
So, as a bank, if anybody who's listening to this has never worked in a financial institution, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, someone is trying to attack your business. That's just how that works. Same thing happens to every consumer company on the planet, right? Because you hold
Yeah.
customer information. So someone would like to hack you. That's just how it is. So you have to be like one of the world's greatest defense mechanisms. You have to be as strong defending everything as you are with kind of growing your business. So you have to be smart and careful about how you use technology in those places because you never want to allow for an exposure.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'd say those are the places where you have to be in lockstep with regulators. There are processes. And if you do a little research on Bunq, you'll find that we actually got into a legal dispute with the Dutch regulator at one time because we had found an advanced way to do this through
Mm,
technology. And the Dutch regulator didn't want that process. They wanted what they had as their more traditional process. And we had to ultimately prove that out. I think today they understand that. We won that court case and they now
yeah.
understand that and they look to those types of innovations in a way they didn't before. But it took kind of having the flat out disagreement in order to get it to
Yeah.
that point.
Yeah. But Joe, this has been an incredibly insightful episode. I really, really appreciate you making the time, being so open with sharing your experiences, and everything that you've done. Where can founders find you if they want to reach out and connect with you?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn's still the best place, right? I mean, even though it's full of ads, uh, and I get spam all the time, just reference the podcast, please.
Yeah, ads and AI content. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm with you
any
on that.
more offers to sell me a service, I won't respond to. But anything that's like, hey, I'm curious about this question, I'm happy to have a conversation. I'm happy to have
Yeah,
chats with people. I'm one of those people who feels like there are no bad networking investments because some of
yeah,
the most interesting things I've gotten to do have come from the most distant connections you didn't expect.
yeah.
So I am a child of circumstance, but just somehow reference the podcast and say that it came from this. That way I'll know what's going on. But LinkedIn is probably the best spot. Yeah, it's
Awesome. There we go.
Joe Wilson. You can just find me if you search for Joe Wilson's in Bunq or Joe Wilson. And Rise was my own company, RISE.
Yeah.
You'll find me.
Yeah, Joe, you're a legend. Thank you so much for this,
Thanks,
and your
Sam.
inbox is going to be flooded.
Thanks for well, that's a testament to your show, right? And like if I can leave everybody with it, like look, you talk to entrepreneurs, you talk about hiring. This is a big part of your conversation. I have this fundamental belief that there are so many amazing ideas and so many people that are afraid to take that step. If I
Yeah,
can inspire anybody to just fucking try, like
yeah,
don't wait. The moment that you wait, someone else will do it. Give it a shot, fail, but man, take your shot. I mean, I'd rather fail at it than I would have said I never tried when I should have. And I hope someone takes a kick from that and goes. So Cheers, man.
100%.
See you.